Welcome to the Real Chili Podcast.
And the Golden Eagles of Marquette University in Milwaukee are bound for the Final Four for only the third time ever.
5 seconds left. Marquette down by one, trying to avoid the upset. Blue the drive, the left hand. It's good. 1 second to play. Vander Blue has put Marquette in front by one.
And I want to win every day as basketball players, as students, and I want to win every day, most importantly, as people.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Chili Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Lavender. I'm joined by Eric Pond, Pete Mohan, and Pete Worth. And fellas, finally, we've come to the end of the season, and we are here today to recap, to digest, to discuss, to break down, and to ultimately evaluate the 2016-2017 Marquette men's basketball season. You guys ready?
Let's evaluate.
I'm ready for some very thorough and enlightening discussion amongst four extremely intelligent young Marquette minds.
We're about to have more perspective than Frank Lloyd Wright.
Oh, jeez. That's a challenge, but I think we can do it. So we came into this season, and you remember this is the end of Steve Wojciechowski's third year. We came into this season with the first 2 years under Wojo being lackluster. Teams didn't make postseason play. Even beyond that, they weren't fun to watch. They weren't exciting. So I think we, on this podcast, came into the season with two expectations. One, let's have a fun-to-watch basketball team that is entertaining. And two, let's make the NCAA tournament. From those two metrics alone, if we're just looking at this season, I've got to consider it a success from start to finish. What do you guys think about that? Do you agree?
Completely agree. I think, we all went into the season at the beginning of recording pods and just looking amongst ourselves at what that landscape looks like in the Big East, what the team looked like, what the roster looked like with some uncertainties and some new faces. And I think making the tournament was the dream, and we achieved it. I think it's a success. I think you have to give the season an A. You have to give Wojo props for what he did this year, and I think, now we can look forward. Matt Velasquez posted a real nice piece after the season wrapped. He said, getting to the NCAA tournament next year is no longer a goal that's difficult to visualize. And I think moving forward, that's great. That's exactly where we want to be. It's not the mountain to climb getting to the tournament anymore. It's winning in the tournament, and that's what we have to look at in 2018.
Well, speaking of props, Eric, I think that the fact that we were able to be props in University of South Carolina's Final Four montages for the rest of their school's history.
Yeah.
Hey, we wouldn't have thought we'd have that opportunity to be someone's Final Four props.
And more importantly, very much increase our chances to get onto one shining moment.
That's true.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of Marquette highlights throughout the NCAA tournament coverage, simply as a backdrop to Sindarius Thornwell's dunks. So, it's refreshing to see us on there.
I'll take it.
Towards the end of the season, I think we obviously have a tendency to focus on the NCAA tournament, Marquette's lack of success there. But as Eric said, as I said, the goal at the beginning of the season was to make the NCAA tournament. We were able to check that box, but let's not forget, there were a lot of things that happened this season. On the negative side, we had 2 in-season transfers. It's hard to believe this feels like so long ago, but Tracy Carter and Sandy Cohen both left the team before the new year, before 2017. We had sensational performances from Marcus Howard. He came in with the second all-time season in NCAA basketball history in terms of three-point shooting percentage. So absolutely phenomenal. Other shooters like Sam Hauser and Andrew Rousey. There's a lot of notable things. And for the second time in Marquette history, we knocked off the number 1 team. That's only the second time we've done that. So when you look back at the season, so many highlights, so many lowlights, and I'm wondering, if I want to throw it to you guys, I want to see kind of first off the top of your mind, what sticks out as a highlight for the season for you?
It sounds a little rough on Sandy to say, but it actually, once he did leave, and actually once Tracy left, this is no mark on those guys, but the team kind of formulated a set roster and
A coherent rotation.
Yeah, a cohesive group that we could rely on. And that was one of my keys going into the year. And Mike, talking about what we expected at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of question marks from a lot of these new guys. We had 4 new guys in Rousey, Reinhart, Hauser, and Howard, and that we didn't really know anything about. And the fact that they were able to be such huge contributors, all 4 of them, really blew my expectations for them out of the water. And making the NCAA tournament was obviously the highlight. 10 years ago, we didn't really even have to think about making the NCAA tournament going into those seasons. We just thought it was basically a formality.
It was to be expected.
And then when Buzz left, it kind of put us on our heels a little bit. Now that we've suffered through those few seasons, it was definitely a huge relief to get back and exciting just to hear your name called on Selection Sunday.
This year, I think bringing in a lot of these new transfers, some of this young talent like Marcus Howard, Sam Hauser, really felt like we successfully were able to kickstart the program. It felt like last year was a bit of a placeholder with Henry Ellenson. This year we were able to establish some sort of identity, and whether that identity included lack of defense, I think it did.
It did.
But offensive efficiency, I think we were one of the best in the country. We hit the most 3-pointers in program history. We beat the number 1 team in the country. First time in regular season play we've done that. Second time ever, Mike, as you said. There were a lot of highlights. It was a fun team to watch, just generally, style of play, although it was frustrating at times, was fun. It was exhilarating. I think it was marked by inconsistent play and streaks where we would, drop 4 out of 5, win 4 out of 5. It was giving me heart palpitations throughout the year, but it was fun anyway. And I think a lot of that was 3-pointers, offensive efficiency, and a lot of that is due to some of these promising young guys, which I'm most excited about.
If we're talking about highlights and kind of my biggest takeaways of positive things that happened during the course of the year, I think, one, making the NCAA tournament. That's where this program absolutely needs to be. And our expectation, from my standpoint, given everything that the university invests in basketball, we should not only expect to win, we should expect to make the Sweet 16. I think that wasn't a reality this year. In years to come, that should be a reality. So I think that's the biggest positive from the season. Beating Villanova was absolutely huge. And I don't want to lose sight of, I think, one of the biggest gambles that happened this season, and it paid off. It looks like it paid off in retrospect, was the lineup change that was made towards the end of the season that Coach Wojciechowski and the other coaches decided to implement, that really, you're putting Matt Helt on the floor, you're starting Dwayne Wilson and others, but that was a spark plug. So as I look back at the season, those are things that stand out to me now that are going to stick around for a long time and really become important, because I think through that lineup change, we found out a lot about the guys, particularly those that are coming back next year.
For me, the highlight of the season was just, and kind of playing off what Eric said, was just the exhilarating nature of our season. There really weren't too many games where we were just completely blown out. Obviously, the Georgetown game was awful to watch. The first Villanova game wasn't really that close either. It always sucks when you lose to Wisconsin. Michigan, yeah, that's something I'd rather not think about. But they were a team of destiny this year, as they say. But really, it's just, for me, the biggest highlight, actually, is just the fact that Wojo was able to mold an identity out of the personnel that he was given. We were the number 1 3-point shooting team in the country and the number 4 effective field goal shooting team in the country. When you have the pieces to do that, and we talked about that coming into the year, we're like, oh, we got all these shooters coming in, I think we're really going to improve from last year. I don't think any of us envision us being basically the number 1 shooting team in the country.
No, that beyond our wildest dreams.
So the fact that, we envision some maybe, B-plus caliber 3-point shooting this season, and Wojo was able to take those pieces and turn them into potentially the best shooting team in the entire nation, I think that says a lot about Wojo's ability to mold the roster of what he's got at the time and use the strengths that he has in order to create a winning season. And I think that's the nature of college basketball. Is it's not like you can formulate this perfect roster like you could in the NBA. You have these volatile situations where 4 years is the most years you can be there. You got transfers and new recruits and, unforeseen things that are happening. So you just have to be able to adapt to the players that you were given. And I don't think that we saw that in the first few years. Wojo struggled to create an identity with the rosters that he had. So for me this year, just the fact that he got those guys playing in one direction, my favorite band, that I think that it was awesome.
I was just listening to Steve Wojciechowski appeared on the 540 ESPN in Milwaukee and did kind of their season recap, and they talked about a lot of things, and I'm going to mention it more throughout the show, but one of the things that Wojo specifically mentioned was the nature of college basketball today, where no matter your program, it's a completely or significantly different team every year because of all these different transfer options. It's not just high school and JUCOs anymore, right? And so I couldn't agree more, Mohan, with what you said of one of a coach's biggest challenges and jobs year in and year out is getting the new team that they have to be on the same page and play together. And clearly they did that from an offensive standpoint. We'll get to the defense later, but I totally agree. I think it was a good job from Wojo on that part.
Yeah, and Eric, like you said, that Matty V put on his latest article that the NCAA tournament next year is not difficult to visualize. But it is hard to get to, no matter what. It's not like it's going to be guaranteed next year, especially losing 30 points per game, between Juwan and Caton and Luke. Next season's no guarantee, and especially with our new class, I think Jamal Cain looks like a guy that he can. We'll talk about the recruits coming in, in future pods or whatever, maybe a little bit later in this episode. I think Jamal Cain can be a contributor right away. I think maybe Theo John can. Yeah. Ike Eki might be a little more of a long-term project. Harry Froling will be, I believe, have mid-season eligibility.
That's right.
So we're going to be thin. We're going to be super thin in the front court again. Even thinner than this year. So it'll be a very, very interesting test of Wojo's mettle next year to see if he can get us back.
And let's not forget we're losing Dwayne's contributions too. Between Juwan, Fisher, Caton, we also lost Tracy, Sandy, and Dwayne from the beginning of this season.
I think Tracy's transfer hurts the most, honestly.
That's probably right.
Look, I'm a huge Dwayne fan, but we're losing him for his grad transfer year. That's one season. Tracy transferred out, missing a total potential of 2.5 seasons. So the fact that we're kind of heading into next year with question marks behind Howard and Rousey at the point guard position is, it's a little bit stressful going into next season.
I just want to rewind for 1 second. We were at the macro level, really talking about season highlights and generally the great progress we saw this season in establishing identity. But I want to break it down a little bit more granularly and call out one real highlight that I think we can all agree on outside the Nova game. And it was the National Marquette Day game against Xavier in front of a sold-out crowd at the BMO Harris Bradley Center, where Marcus Howard lost his mind. He shot 9 of 12 from the three, tying our all-time single-game record for three-pointers in front of the record holder. He just went bananas, scored 34 points.
BANANAS.
we that got us to 7-7 in the Big East. Really sort of set us back on track. Just that performance from Marcus Howard in that day really sticks out in my mind, and I think on the year, that's one thing that, we'll look at throughout Marcus Howard's career as hopefully sort of an indication of who he's going to become.
It was the highest percentage since 2014 when Micah Mason hit 56% for Duquesne.
And what was Marcus's percentage in that game?
So in that game, he was 75% from the three.
That's insane. 9
of 12.
And he was just 17. 17!
He's going to be 17 until he leaves Marquette.
He'll never be able to get into calves.
So a lot of positives from this season, right? Marcus Howard, getting to the tournament, Villanova. I think you can, Eric, we all mentioned the 4 new faces that we had on the court this year: Andrew Rousey, Marcus Howard, Caton Reinhardt, and Sam Hauser. I think you can make the case that Caton Reinhardt wasn't exactly what we thought he was going to be, but he did turn out to be a net positive, certainly later in the season.
Huge.
But all of those 4 people, as you said, I would argue exceeded expectations, and we couldn't have done that without every single one of them. Now, maybe they didn't blow through expectations, but they certainly delivered and played their role. And I think the most positive thing for me is that you can look at social media and see photos of these guys. They seem to genuinely like each other and enjoy each other's company. And I think that translated certainly later in the season on the court. They played like a team. They played together. Were they always the best? Hell no. Did their defense suck most of the time? Yes. But they played together, and I think that got them through some tougher games that a team that was more divided wouldn't have been able to get through. So I think, as Eric was saying, from the macro level, that's certainly a positive. And you can't not attribute that to the coaches in some way, shape, or form. Of course, it comes down to personalities, but coaches are recruiting these guys. They're talking to these guys every day. So coaches, including Steve Wojciechowski, absolutely have a hand in molding that. And we didn't see that in the first 2 years of Wojo's era. So to see that in this year, I said at the beginning of the season, third year is very typically telling of the rest of the trajectory. From that standpoint alone, I think this is a positive. Now we need to see what happens next year, but a positive, right?
Well, these players were just much more skilled at basketball than the previous years, which is a big deal when it comes to coaching and success.
When it comes to playing basketball, skill at basketball.
Yeah, it helps. It helps. It's crucial.
You want some ballers.
But also, the team was just very unselfish, and it helped that any of 5 or 6 guys could go out and get you 20 points in any game. And when one guy was feeling it, the team was happy to defer to that guy, whether it was Caden, whether it was Rousey. Rousey had some games where he basically carried our team, and he's especially carried it, I thought, in the later part of the season, going into the Seton Hall game in the Big East tournament when we obviously struggled, and also in the South Carolina game. He was kind of the leader.
Carried it with attitude.
Yeah, with attitude and toughness, and was hitting tough shots.
4-point plays.
4-point play after 4-point play.
He's Mr. 4-point play. Holy shit.
But just a chip on his shoulder.
I will still never believe how the refs fall for that shit every time. But kudos to the little guy for, I call him little, but we're the exact same height, for perfecting that move, because it was huge this year. But yeah, I mean, he went off against DePaul in both games, knocking down like 6 or 7 threes. Big ups for that. Those performances, but also just handling the ball through some difficult pressure of like Villanova's defense, South Carolina's defense, some of these really tough defensive squads, and we relied on him to protect the ball for us when Marcus Howard, only a freshman, struggled at times.
It's so surprising that when you end up beating DePaul twice in the same year, usually you end up going to the tournament.
Dare I say, we saw some Rodney Clark type performances this year.
No.
Oh yeah, I think so. And you predicted it, right? So of course you bring that back up.
Yes.
No, yeah. I would say it was more. I would say it was more Steph Curry-esque.
Jeez.
To be the buzzkill that I normally am, we need to transition to some of the negatives from this season, because we're not here to have a season recap be, this happy-go-lucky fest where we're talking about only the good things. There were a lot of negative things that happened through the course of this season that could have implications going forward that can't be overlooked. So as I look at them, the biggest thing that stands out in my mind is defense. You cannot win championships without defense. That analogy applies in football and basketball. Our defense is a major area of concern. In the show that I mentioned that Steve Wojciechowski joined with Homer and 540 ESPN and that crew, Wojo acknowledged that it doesn't take a genius to see that our defense was not very good this year, and they need to fix that. One of the ways that's going to be fixed is by the height that we're adding in recruiting. We're adding 6'9", 6'8", and 6'7", I believe. Freshmen, yes, but freshmen can defend. These freshmen should be able to defend, but I think there are schematic things that the coaching staff probably wasn't able to do with the personnel that we had there on the court. So long term, both through personnel and coaching scheme, we need to see improvement on defense, because that was a major negative this season.
I'm just going to read you 4 headlines from our friend Matty V at the Journal Sentinel that span from December 10th to January 16th. December 10th, notes, Marquette defense not up to the task. December 20th, Marquette's defense still a work in progress. January 7th, Villanova 93, Marquette 81. Defense a no-show. January 16th, notes, defense remains an issue for Marquette. Obviously, we need to dive deeper, but it's just a sign of clearly how the year went for us. when you're leading.
Made it easy for Matty V coming up with headlines. All he had to do was like switch a few words around.
Clearly.
Come up with a couple synonyms for bad, and then he got something.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, at times it looked like our guys weren't even competing on defense, which is probably the most disappointing, a faction of it or a factor in it. We looked soft underneath.
Coincidentally, that's the same part of the season when our students and our fans are at the least at the Bradley Center.
I think all the concerns around getting all the right size and the right athletes in there, I think Wojo's starting to address that. But I don't want to overlook the fact that because I think good defense comes from playing team defense and knowing where the other person's going to be on the court. I don't have anything to quantify this, but I do think we were able to get marginally better at defense throughout the year. Was it good enough overall? No. But I do think they started to play a little bit better together throughout the course of the year on the defensive side of the ball. It better be a hell of a lot better next year. But within the course of this season, I think I see that as the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relative, right? Like, maybe there were less wide-open three-pointers, uncontested layups, dunks, like at the end of the year. But
I think that we need to give props to Luke Fisher because he was a stalwart defensively throughout the year, in my opinion. I mean, there was games where he had multiple blocks because he was the only guy patrolling the paint in the entire defense. And, there's times where people might say that he had some lapses, but he's on an island down low in most scenarios.
Yeah, when Sam Hauser's your help guy and he's a freshman and, he's talented, right? But he's a freshman and he's not that big. So great point.
But Luke does the most with his athleticism. And I think the same goes for Helt, is that maybe this coaching staff has done a good job of finding the strengths in each player's defensive game and utilizing those aspects. Like, for example, Luke's shot blocking. His athleticism and ability to alter shots in the lane was the highlight of his defensive ability. Helt, it was moving his feet, staying in front of the guys that are trying to back him down and using his strength to keep guys out of the paint. And you saw it even, sometimes he would be able to front a guy, defend the pass from getting in, and get back around and play defense. And so it's not going to be shot blocking with Matt Helt. It's going to be solid, moving your feet, man-to-man defense. And I think that the coaching staff is doing what they can to maximize these guys' strengths. There's just such a lack of length the past season. Yeah. And you can't really judge this team defensively, in my opinion, until we get the length in there.
I think Bubbles would be having an aneurysm right now after hearing all that.
I know, he would.
Because Luke, yes, for his abilities, he did the best that he could, I think. In terms of shot blocking, he was our only guy down there that has that skill, and he did it fairly well. However, his pick-and-roll defense was pretty dreadful. His rebounding, for a 7-footer, his rebounding left a lot to be desired, mostly on the defensive end. I don't think I saw the guy box out once in like 3 years.
His awareness score is probably a 32.
Yeah. He never showed any ounce of improvement when it came to defending the pick and roll. I mean, I just think back to that Butler game where Shrabis carved us up left and right. He was not able to stay in front of guys. And then his rebounding, he averaged, I think, 6 a game, which, it's okay.
Way too low.
But for a guy getting that much, that we relied on so much to be one of our only like post defenders, I was really hoping for at least a couple more boards per game, and he was in foul trouble a lot, and that might have hurt his overall statistics. But I guess we all just kind of hoped that he would improve more when it came to toughness and physical play down low, and we never really saw that too much. He was a great player for Marquette, provided what we needed, but when he first got here, compared to what our expectations were, he failed to meet those.
We talked about this early and often, and we were one of the first Marquette basketball community outlets to diagnose this, was the problem with our pick-and-roll defense and putting our players in a position where they needed to stay with the ball handler in a pick-and-roll situation, leaving the roller open. Luke wasn't able to consistently cover that. Matt Helt did a better job situationally in moving his feet, as you mentioned, Pete Mohan. But we didn't necessarily have the bodies to execute what the coaches wanted to execute. So it's going to be very interesting and important to see how we defend that next year with the people we have coming in. Another negative that I want to focus on that is still an open question mark, I think, for next year is Hanif Cheatham. someone who we all almost unanimously pegged is going to be our best player this season. Obviously, his minutes declined throughout the season, and I think we've made references to the fact that he was a one-trick pony, that he needs to have more skills in his arsenal. It's going to be an interesting summer. We said this on the last pod. It's going to be an interesting summer to see what he can develop because he just didn't have enough tools in his tool shed to make an impact on the court this season. Hanif's got the will, the want to. He's got the IQ to be a player on this team. And, with transfer from Dwayne Wilson, other people leaving the program, more fresh faces, that might open the door for Hanif next season.
I think that Hanif is due for a big season. He was arguably our best player last season, even with Henry on the team. I mean, Henry obviously has the NBA potential, but Hanif was really the guiding force last year in that he was solid. You could count on him to do it, play his role, maybe put up 10 to 15 points each game, and he played great for a freshman. This year, it was just a lot muddier roster situation in the backcourt. Hanif was maybe forced to guard some guys that were a little too big for him, or he was switching between guards and small forwards, and he never got his rhythm throughout the year. The other problem was he was relying too much on his one or two drives. He would get into the lane, spin, leave his feet, and then throw it away or throw up a bad shot. And as teams started to scout Hanif, the fact that he was more one-dimensional offensively started to come to light. So I think, and you saw maybe some of his tweets or whatever after the season saying that he's ready to put in work for this next season. And I think that he has the capability. I mean, he's a good athlete, and he's a smart kid. He has the ability to put more offensive skills together coming into his junior season.
He didn't really fit with this roster makeup.
Yeah, he didn't.
Yeah.
Once we got into conference play and we kind of formed that identity that we were a tremendous three-point shooting team, he didn't really mesh well with that. I mean, when we are able to throw four very good shooters on the court, along with Luke at one time, especially on offense, giving it to Cheatham, who, when he gets the ball, mostly wants to take it into the hole every time, and is a decent passer, but not a great passer by any means. He just didn't really find his role.
I would argue that the two people who ended up occupying Hanif's role the most on the court this season were probably a combination of Juwan and Caton, and maybe more so Caton.
And Dwayne even. Yeah, especially later in the year with Dwayne. Mm-hmm. And so those names, Juwan, Caton, and Dwayne, they're all gone next year. So Hanif has an opportunity. Don't kid yourself. I mean, this isn't going to be a guy who rides the pine as much as he did, particularly towards the end of this year. He's got an opportunity. He just needs to capitalize on it. And the fact that he has that mentality, that he knows that, is a positive overall.
Hopefully he does come back and occupies a larger role next season. I mean, we're talking about a hyper-talented recruit that came to us. He was the third leading scorer on the team last season with Henry Ellenson, where maybe, the fit was a little bit better, as you just discussed. But the issues on the season for him seem to be slumping and then coming back up and then slumping. I mean, it was really inconsistencies. Some of that, folks diagnosed that as confidence issues, perhaps. At one point in the season, Wojo called it out as maybe, losing confidence. He went 5 for 18 with 13 points, against Western Carolina, Georgia, Fresno State. I mean, just a terrible slump. He sort of came back up, averaged 17.7 in the next 3 games after that against Wisconsin, St. Francis, and SIU Edwardsville. But a lot of it was him not being able to shoot the ball and him not being able to, as is his sort of MO, finish at the rim when he's slashing and driving. I think it was slumping, inconsistent play. The talent is clearly all still there. Hopefully it's just, him being in his head for certain parts of the season, and that may be an easy thing to fix moving forward.
Yeah, he carved up the cupcakes, but he didn't really carve up the meat too well.
Yeah. That's fair.
Mike, one more negative I just want to throw out there for the season that's maybe more of a macro level thing. But one thing that we really didn't take advantage of this year was our non-conference schedule. We talked about earlier in the year that the athletic department did a good job of scheduling a better non-conference schedule. And I think that, maybe our RPI at the end of the year wasn't as high as we would have hoped. It was certainly better than last year. So we have to give some credit to the athletic department for scheduling these guys. But, our performance in New York at the beginning of the season was pathetic. The loss that, what was our lead, 18 or 20 points against Pitt that we gave up, that lead, and then really we're a no-show against Michigan.
And we were there for a half against Wisconsin. And I agree that loss to Pittsburgh, that's the one that we still made it to the tournament, and that didn't ultimately have a bearing on our season. But at the time,
but that's where the point that I was actually going to, Mike. That's why I think it does have a bearing on the season. Is while we played well throughout the regular season in the Big East, and we did get into the tournament, maybe if we win that Pitt game, maybe if we don't falter down the stretch in Big East play, we don't have to face a team that's going to end up playing in the Final Four in South Carolina. That was a bit of an unlucky matchup for us, clearly, as this team went on to beat Duke and some other really good teams.
Just a bit?
Yeah, just a bit.
Just a bit.
So, it's a tough draw, but, you earn it. The lower your seed, the more likely you are to play a team that's going to the Final Four. And if we were able to maybe pull up that Pitt game or maybe take advantage of some other close games in the non-conference, who knows? Maybe we would have a chance to win a game or two in the tournament.
That second half against Pitt, when Michael Young scored about 6 or 7 straight layups in consecutive possessions.
That was the highlight of Luke's defensive career.
Yeah. That was a little bit foreshadowing of the rest of the season to come.
Before we transitioned here to kind of our final discussion about coaches, about overall coaching and kind of where the program sits before we wrap up this pod, I wanted to mention one more thing and get y'all's take on it. Over the final 5 games of the Big East Conference season, Marquette went 4-1. We beat Xavier, we beat St. John's. We beat Xavier twice, St. John's, and then Creighton, and lost another close one to Providence. But in there was the change that was initiated starting on National Marquette Day with the new lineup, where we started Matt Helt over Fisher, where we started Andrew Rousey, where we started Dwayne Wilson. At the time, that seemed like it really changed things. We couldn't all believe it that Matt Helt was putting up this performance. And there were other things in there, too. In hindsight, as we get further away from it, I wonder what your guys' thoughts are on whether that was a mirage and whether, that was Wojo just reading the tea leaves at the time in the right way. What was that? Because it did seem to work.
It was just a roster shakeup. Something needed to be changed just for the sake of change. You get blown out by Georgetown on the road by 18 points, and we looked hapless out there from the get-go. I think that was a great job by him by just taking the week of practice. Who's going to play their hardest? Who's going to practice their hardest? And show that they care enough to earn the minutes. And that's what he did, regardless of skill, which was, I thought, was pretty bold on his part. And then I think the players were inspired by that, especially Helt and Wilson, maybe, that they showed that despite the fact that they weren't starters for the majority of the season, that they worked their asses off maybe that week and earned the minutes, and then they wanted to prove to Wojo that he made a good decision by starting them, and I think that kind of motivated the rest of the team too.
I just want to say, speaking of Georgetown, any chance that JT3 joins our assistant coaching staff next year? Ew.
Ew. Let's close out this pod with a discussion that I think is probably the most important that we're going to have here today, and that's taking a step back, looking at what we wanted to happen, what needed to happen this season, and what did happen on the court, off the court, with the roster, with the coaching decisions. Let's take stock. How do we grade this season? How do we think about this season going forward? Was it a step in the right direction? Was it keeping things the same? Or was it a step backwards? I think one of the things that I heard from Wojo over the past few days is he said that when he arrived in Milwaukee, it was clear that he needed to, quote, reboot the program, end quote. Reboot. And from my sense in the interview that I heard with him, he feels like he's done that to a degree, that he's heading in the right direction, that attendance is heading in the right direction, that we have an exciting team to watch. It feels that way to me right now, but it feels like we're only 50, maybe 40% of the way there. That we took the right steps forward this season, but it by no means is the ultimate goal. And it's one thing to have this coaching staff and Steve Wojciechowski answer the questions they did next year, or this year. Can they answer those questions again next year? Can they take a step up? I think, it's only going to get harder from here. And that's kind of where I sit with Wojo and this coaching staff right now.
You said it was maybe a step back, Mike?
No, I said was it? That was a question. I did not say that. No, I think it was a step forward given the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think of course it's a step forward. We made the NCAA tournament first time in 4 years. Got a bunch of new guys that proved that they were capable D1 players. Marcus Howard lit up the scoreboard in numerous games. We already talked about his percentages. There was so many positives to take away from this year. I mean, we've just talked about the negatives, yeah, but we made the NCAA tournament. That's the bottom line. Now we need to continue doing that. It's going to be very difficult, but let's see what kind of recruits that Wojo can get. Let's see what Jamal Kane, Theo John, and Ike Eki can bring next year. And Harry Froling. Let's see what kind of physical presence he can be. In a couple, maybe not next year, the year after is the Bailey kid coming in, right? The Mormon fella,
right.
The Mormon
2018.
kid. So
Mormon fella, yeah.
yeah. So let's see if he did a little recruiting of his own, how well he did on his recruiting mission, and then see what kind of recruit he turns out to be. So I'm looking forward to the next few years for sure. This is definitely a step up.
It's a step up, but were you convinced? Were you? Do you believe that Steve Wojciechowski? Do you still believe that he is someone who can get us to the Sweet 16 consistently? Was there anything in this season that disproved that to you, or do you still have hope that Wojo can be someone who perennially gets his teams to where they need to be in the NCAA tournament here at Marquette?
I have hopes. I mean, but it's getting to the Sweet 16 every year is no given. I mean, look at Duke. They just lost in the second round. Getting the Sweet 16,
but they have a shot every year.
Sure, yeah, but it's extremely difficult, to get to that part. I mean, especially with the randomness of a single elimination bracket. Yeah, we look at the end of the year, and especially the NCAA tournament results as kind of like a summation of the season, but we shouldn't necessarily do that. I mean, look at all the great wins that we had this year, especially Villanova, beating Xavier twice, beating Creighton twice. I mean, I look at those more than I do just like the loss against South Carolina as indicative of a promising future.
I think that we're actually in really good shape going into next year. 3 numbers right off the bat, things that we're dealing with this past season. Experience in the country, 192nd. Minutes continuity, 206th. Average height, 196th. Those 3 numbers are all going to change in a positive direction going into next season. We'll be more experienced. We have tournament experience now. And we're going to be a heck of a lot taller, longer, and more athletic next season. You mentioned a name in Harry Froling. I think that next year, Froling is going to be our second best player behind Marcus Howard. I think that he's a stud, and I think that we're severely underrating what he's capable of. If you looked at his stats in the brief time that he was with SMU, a 6th seed in the country no less before departing, he was getting used almost on a quarter of their possessions. And this is for a true freshman on a team that was a 6th seed in the tournament. Clearly, he was a major contributor to a good team, and similar to the way Caton was used with USC before coming in, a high-usage player, I expect the same thing from Froling. So the more balanced roster that we're going to have, it's just going to be a completely different team to watch next year. And I think that's as exciting for me going into next year, that we're going to have this unique, balanced team to look for rather than just a shooting-heavy team. That's super exciting, and I think that we have the capability to do some damage in the NCAA tournament if Wojo's able to piece these puzzle pieces together in the right way like he did this past season.
The season was a success. I think, in answering your question, Mike, really a step forward. I think we all agree on that. We started 2 freshmen throughout the season. We were able to piece together and integrate 4 new guys. Most, I think, exciting about all of this is moving forward, we now have 2 extremely talented youngsters on the roster who are going to take and carry that experience of playing in the tournament and move it forward and hopefully be hungry, have that sort of groundwork that's been laid to build on. I think it's critical. As you said, Mohan, we're going to be able to piece in and integrate really with recruiting exactly what we lacked this year, which is sort of size in that 6'7", 6'8", talented forward spot. I think moving forward, the expectation for this team, I think we really need to look at having a team that's ranked again. And that's really what we need to be talking about as far as consistent talent coming into the program, consistent performances week in and week out. The AP just released this week, I don't know if you guys saw it, they ranked all the top 100 programs in history based on really the number of total appearances in the AP poll. Marquette finished 21st. We've appeared in 31.4% of all AP polls. And in 2002 and 2003, and then 2011 and 2012, we were ranked every single week throughout the season. I'm not saying that next season or the season after, we're going to be ranked every week, but we need to get there. We need to be in and around the poll. We need to be more than receiving votes. We need to be, establishing that identity once again, that we are in the teens, we're in the 20s, we're right there. I think that's critical.
The fundamental flaw with your argument, Eric, is that we're not in the ACC. We're not in the ACC, so how would we be ranked?
Fair. That's fair. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. That analysis, Eric, I saw that same thing of the AP polls. And, right, you said 2011 or 2012 and 2013, those couple seasons under Buzz where we made it to the Elite Eight, et cetera. Looking at the breakdown of how Marquette was ranked so highly, it was so heavily influenced by Al McGuire's time that it skews to the fact that since then we've had little to no relevance outside of Dwayne Wade.
Yeah.
And so, right?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, if you actually look at the article, in the 70s, we were in 99.4% of all polls.
Right.
In the 80s, we were in 3% of all polls. So feels like our season in a nutshell, the Marquette program history. Just hard to know what you're going to get. But I'm just saying, when you look at the success of the season or just establishing consistency, obviously we can see it with our eyes, but looking at the end of the season, maybe that's a better way to look at it than, consistently, getting to one spot in the NCAA tournament.
You know who else has a promising young team? Marquette women's basketball.
That's true.
Yeah, props. Yeah,
very true.
I'm looking forward to their next season.
They also lost in the first round, but
Yeah.
Theirs was more of an upset than ours.
Right after that tough loss to South Carolina, and then we had to deal with the Big East champions riding high, going into their first round game in the NCAA tournament, just to be shot in the heart by the 12-seed Quinnipiac. It was made for a really, really rough Saturday morning and afternoon.
Well, you know what they say about 12 seeds and 5 seeds. So.
Talk about polling, am I right? Quinnipiac.
I looked through, don't ask me why I did this, but I looked through the entire NCAA women's bracket leading up to the championship game, which is happening tonight. Quinnipiac defeating Marquette was the only upset, not an 8-9 in the entire first round.
Ouch.
I got a really nice kick out of that.
Didn't they go on to win their next game as well? And they had never won a tournament game ever?
Yeah, they did.
That's probably like the first 12 seed to ever reach the Sweet 16 in women's basketball.
All right, folks. So we have clearly concluded our discussion of Marquette men's basketball.
We had to move into the women's team. Yeah.
For the season. Pete Worth, I want to throw it to you for 15 seconds of a plug on something that I know is near and dear to your heart, that people can jump on now that the NCAA tournament is almost over.
Okay, well, we should give 15 seconds to Pete Mohan, too, because he's co-founder here.
All right, so you got 10 seconds left. So.
A little thing called Lenten Madness was created in O'Donnell Hall in 2005 by Peter Mohan and myself. It is a 64 hymn bracket, your favorite church hymns that you grew up going to Mass, listening to, hearing every Sunday at your Catholic church. Find it on Facebook, Lenten Madness, and vote for your favorite church hymn matchups. Last year, I believe Here I Am, Lord took home the crown.
Great tune.
Before that, it was On Eagle's Wings, basically the Kentucky of this particular bracket. So get out to the Facebook and vote for a little invention, brainchild of Peter and myself back in the halls of Marquette called Lenten Madness.
And just so we're clear, even if you're not a Catholic and didn't grow up going to Catholic church, some of these tunes will be familiar to you from other branches of the Christian faith. So if you're not a Catholic,
like Jesus, grab a towel.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, some of those you come up with. Ride on, Jesus Ride. I'm still never heard that one. But I'm really rooting for it in the St. Hugo Theological 32 this year.
Oh, boy. All right, folks.
I believe we're about to reach the St. Patrick Sacramental 16, and eventually we'll wrap up with the David Haas National Catechesis at some point in the future, a couple weeks.
Absolutely.
So
get your votes in.
So that is going to do it for us here at the Real Chili Podcast for the 2016-2017 Marquette men's basketball season. It has been a hell of a ride. We've done over 20 episodes, close to 30. We've had over 40,000 downloads on all of the platforms. It's been a really successful, and probably much more importantly, it's been a really fun season for us. But don't take that to mean that we're done for the year. We're going to have plenty of great content, probably at a slower pace, but plenty of great content coming at you throughout the season. There's, of course, the TBT tournament, the Marquette Alumni Tournament. We're going to have a pod coming up soon about the recruiting class coming in. So we'll be talking to you throughout the summer and throughout the coming months, but we'll be back in full force when we get closer to basketball season. Fellas, any final words before we sign off for this year?
Great success.
It's been a lot of fun. Next year just won't be the same without Bubbles losing his shit about Luke Fisher every week. So I'm going to miss that. Also realizing that Frank Martin and Barack Obama have the exact same hair. That was a big moment for me this year.
Also, Frank Martin, doesn't he look like the one-armed man from The Fugitive?
Oh, like the murderer guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to look up at that. But I just going off my memory, I can see that.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here at the Real Chili Podcast. Thanks so much for listening to us and being dedicated listeners throughout the season. Please stay tuned to your iTunes feed, your SoundCloud feed, or your YouTube feed throughout the summer to hear more great content for us. Look us up on Twitter if you haven't already. We are at Real Chili Pod. Signing off for Pete Mohan, Eric Pond, and Pete Worth, and Brian Henry, who's not here. I'm Mike Lavender. Thanks so much for listening to the Real Chili Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.